My name is Vivian Grant, and on the morning I turned 40, I packed a folding chair, a thermos of coffee, and a lemon cake for a woman who had been dead for 20 years. I was the only one going. My mom and the rest of my family had brunch plans across town, and my grandmother's name hadn't been said out loud at their table in years. So it was just me, a grocery bag cake, and a cemetery gate at 8 in the morning. Except it wasn't just me. A man was waiting beside my grandmother's headstone with a shovel, and in a way, he had been waiting there for 35 years. "She knew you'd come here on your 40th, he said. "She paid me in 1990. What he pulled out of that ground made me fall to my knees in the wet June grass. But here's the truth. The hole behind that headstone wasn't what broke my family in half. It was what my mother did 20 years ago, and what she was planning to do in 6 more weeks. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where family secrets come to light and quiet women find their voice. If stories about standing up for the people who loved you first speak to you, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. My birthday and my grandmother's cemetery visit have been the same trip since I was 20. Grandma Rose died in March of 2005, 3 months before I turned 20, and that June I drove out to Maple Hill because the grass on her grave was still seams and squares. I have gone every year since. Nobody ever asked to come along. That morning, my phone buzzed itself across the kitchen counter while I frosted the lemon cake. The family group chat was awake early. My cousin posted a waffle emoji. My mom wrote, "Brunch at 10, don't be late." And then, big family meeting Sunday, everyone required. Not one of them mentioned that it was my birthday. Not one of them ever remembered that it was also the day I went to see Grandma. To be fair, I'd stopped announcing it years ago. You get tired of watching people's faces do polite arithmetic. The cake was her recipe, the one she taped inside her cabinet door, written in pencil, lemon rind and buttermilk, and a warning not to rush the oven. I baked it every June because she baked it every June, and someone in a family should keep the stove warm for the dead. My old dog Biscuit took his spot on the back seat, gray around the muzzle, a professional at cemetery naps. The drive to Maple Hill takes 15 minutes, and one left turn past the feed store. I had done it so many times the car could have driven itself. But when I came through the iron gate that morning, something was different. A green cemetery pickup sat parked under the elm trees near Grandma's row, and a man stood beside it, not working, not mowing, just watching the gate. Watching, I realized, for me. I parked and carried the chair and the cake box down the row, and the man took off his cap and held it, which is a thing men his age do when they mean respect and are nervous at the same time. He looked to be in his mid-50s, sun-cured, forearms like fence posts. "Miss Grant?" he said. I stopped a few feet short. "Vivian," I said. "Do I know you?" "Walter Beam," he said. "I keep the grounds here. Have for 35 years. I told him the place always looked beautiful, because it did, and because I didn't yet understand why my mouth had gone dry. He turned his cap in his hands like a steering wheel. "Ma'am, I've been waiting on this particular morning for most of my working life," he said. "She knew you'd come here on your 40th. She told me you would. She paid me in 1990 to dig a small hole 3 feet behind her headstone when that day came." The cemetery went very quiet, the way a room does when someone says your name in a doctor's office. "Who did?" I asked, though there was only one grave in that row I'd ever brought cake to. "Your grandmother, Rose Hollis," he said. He pulled a cracked leather wallet from his back pocket, and from behind an old fishing license he slid a card, soft as cloth from handling, the ink gone brown. In careful cursive it said, "June 14th, 2025. For V. Wait for her. She'll come." My knees felt like borrowed furniture. Grandma had written that when I was 5 years old. "I check the obituaries every June, all these years to make sure you were still living," Walter said, and then he reached into the truck bed and lifted out a spade. I made him talk first. 40 years of being a careful woman doesn't dissolve because a stranger has pretty handwriting in his wallet. Walter didn't mind. He leaned on the spade and told it plain. In the spring of 1990, he was 21, brand new on the mowing crew, and a widow started coming around while the office set a double headstone for her and her late husband. Harold Hollis had died the fall before, in 1989, and Grandma did what steady widows did back then. She bought her arrangements ahead. All of it, paid in full. Except she didn't buy 2 plots. She bought the whole row of 4, under the elm. Folks assumed the extra 2 were for her children, Walter said. She never said one way or the other. What she did say, she said to him, the youngest man on the crew, the one she'd decided had a face that kept things. She paid him in cash, and she left a sealed envelope in the cemetery office safe with a date on it, and she made him swear. 3 feet behind her headstone, 3 feet down, on her granddaughter's 40th birthday, and not 1 day sooner. If the girl doesn't come, she told him, leave it in the ground. It belongs to her or to nobody. The cemetery changed owners 3 times over the years. Walter stayed through all of them, and so did the envelope in the safe, and so did the card in his wallet. 35 years is a long time to keep a promise, I said. It's the only thing anybody ever trusted me with, he said, so I figured I'd do it right. Then he walked around behind Grandma's headstone, measured off the distance with his boots, and cut the first square of sod. You would think watching a man dig a small hole would be boring. I stood there with my arms crossed over my ribs like I was holding a door shut, and I have never watched anything harder in my life. Walter worked slow and neat, the way he probably did everything, laying each spade of dirt on a tarp so the lawn would heal clean. Biscuit sat at my feet, ears up. The morning smelled like cut grass and coffee I'd forgotten to drink. A foot down, nothing. 2 feet, nothing. And my chest started doing a small, stupid hope math I couldn't shut off. Then the spade knocked. Not a rock sound. A flat, deliberate sound, like knuckles on a table. Walter knelt and swept with his hands, and a gray edge appeared, and it was a piece of slate the size of a serving tray, laid flat like a little roof. She thought of everything, he said, mostly to himself. He lifted the slate, and underneath, wrapped in waxed canvas gone stiff as bark, was a steel box, the kind of army surplus box men keep bolts in, the latch orange with rust but whole. He worked it loose, set it on the grass beside the headstone, and stepped back with his cap off again, and that told me he wasn't going to open it. It was never his to open. I knelt down in the wet grass in my birthday clothes. The latch fought me, then gave. Inside the steel was a tobacco tin, robin's egg blue, the brand they stopped making decades ago, sealed around the lid with candle wax. My hands were shaking so hard the tin rattled. I got a thumbnail through the wax and the lid came away, and my knees quit before my mind had even caught up to what I was looking at. The first thing was a photograph. Black and white. Its edges gone the color of weak tea. A girl stood on a stone step in front of a brick building, and the girl was my grandmother. I knew her the way you know your own handwriting, except she was maybe 20, and she was holding a newborn baby wrapped tight in a hospital blanket. I had seen every album my grandmother ever kept. I had never seen this. Behind her, carved over the door, I could read part of the stone. Saint Agnes. The second thing was small and slid against the tin with a whisper. A hospital bracelet, the old kind, tiny beads strung on a wire, and the beads spelled out, Baby Girl Merrick, and a paper tag tied to it read, 6358. Merrick was my grandmother's maiden name. June 3, 1958, was 2 years before she married my grandfather. The third thing was a white rose, pressed flat as an envelope, so old it had gone the brown of paper bags, and under it all lay a fat envelope, sealed with a single name on the front in that same careful cursive. Vivian. I sat back on my heels in the grass and did the arithmetic I could not stop my brain from doing. In 1958, my grandmother had stood on a step somewhere holding a daughter. My mother was born in 1961, Uncle Dale in 1963, which meant the baby in that blanket was not my mother and was not anyone I had ever been told existed. Grandma had a first child, a girl, 67 years old now, if she was alive, if she was anywhere. Walter stood quiet by the elm with his cap in his hands. Ma'am, he said gently. There's a letter. She'd want you to read the letter. I read it right there on my knees, because standing up was not on the menu. My Vivian, it began, if you are reading this, you are 40, and I have been gone a while, and you still came. I knew you would be the one who came. The handwriting was strong. In 1990, she was 52 and had just buried my grandfather, and she wrote like a woman who had rehearsed every line for 30 years. I had a daughter before your mother. Her name, for the 9 days I was allowed to know her, was written on a bracelet. Not by me. It happened in 1958. I was 20 and not married, and in those days, a girl like me was a problem to be managed. My parents drove me to St. Agnes and told the neighbors I was helping a sick aunt. I signed the papers they put in front of me because everyone I loved stood in that room waiting for me to sign, and then I was driven home and told it never happened. I did as I was told. I want you to know I did not do it quietly on the inside. She wrote that she looked for her daughter for years, in the ways a housewife could, letters and phone calls and one bus trip she never explained to anybody. Records were sealed, doors were polite and closed. And then this line, alone at the bottom of the page, the one I have carried ever since. I was 40 the year I stopped looking. Don't you stop. There was more, and I will get to it. But that was when my phone went off in my jacket like a wasp. My mother. Family meeting Sunday. Monday, 1 o'clock. My house. It's about your grandmother. Beyond time. I looked at the open grave hole, then at the text, and a cold little bell started ringing somewhere behind my ribs. Sunday at my mother's house smelled like percolator coffee and lemon furniture polish, and there was a manila folder squared up on the table like a place setting. My mom, Carol, ran the meeting the way she used to run the loan desk at First Community, no wasted words. Maple Hill had sent a letter. The cemetery was out of room in the old section, and the owners were buying back unused plots at today's prices, real money, and the offer expired August 1st. We own 4, my mom said. Your grandmother bought a whole row, Lord knows why. 2 are sitting empty. Her plan came out smooth as a bank brochure. Sell the 2 empty plots, and since the buyback paid a premium for a full row, move Grandma and Grandpa too, have them cremated and placed in the new memorial wall by the parking lot, and sell all 4. She said the word cremated the way you'd say refinanced. My Uncle Dale stared at the folder like it might bite. Aunt Peg said the roof on their place wouldn't survive another winter, and that was that for Peg. I heard myself say, Mom, she's been in that ground 20 years. She picked that ground. My mother looked at me with genuine patience, which is the worst way she looks at me, and said, Honey, the dead don't need anything. The living do. Around the table, heads nodded the slow nod of people being handed permission. I thought about a robin's egg tin sitting in my kitchen, 3 days out of the dirt, and a bracelet with a stranger's birthday on it, and I said nothing. Saying nothing is a skill I had been perfecting for 40 years. The folder slid across the table and came to rest in front of Dale, with a little flag sticker where his signature would go. I work as a hospice nurse, 14 years now, which means I sit with people during the part of life everyone else politely leaves the room for. That week I was looking after Mr. Aldous, a retired machinist with hands like old leather gloves, and between medication checks he liked to talk. Mostly about his sister. They'd stopped speaking over their father's tools, of all things, decades back. You know what I'd do different? He said that night, apropos of nothing. Everything after 1987. I drove home with the windows down and Grandma's tin on the passenger seat because I'd started carrying it around like a library book I was afraid to return. At my kitchen table I read the letter again, the part after the line about stopping. She wrote, Your mother knows none of this, and that is my failure, not hers. I could not find a way to tell a daughter she was my second chance. And near the end, she would be a grown woman now. If she is alive, she is owed the truth, and this family owes her a place in it. The tin, the bracelet, the pressed rose. A woman had planned this for 35 years, trusted a 21-year-old groundskeeper, and timed it to land on the birthday when I'd be old enough that nobody could tell me to drop it. I called my best friend Marin, who works the same hospice shifts I do, and told her all of it, start to finish. She was quiet a moment. Then she said, "So your grandmother left you a person to find." That was it exactly. Not money, a person. Have you ever been the only one in your family who remembered somebody? The one who keeps the recipe, the grave, the stories nobody asks for anymore? If that's you, tell me in the comments, because I want to know I wasn't the only one standing in that grass. Anyway, Monday morning I started looking for my aunt. Here is what I learned in my first week of looking. The past has a receptionist, and she is very sorry. But no. St. Agnes closed its doors in 1974. The building on the photograph is a county office annex now, with a plaque about historic brickwork and nothing about the girls who stood on that step. The records went to the diocese, said one nice lady on the phone. The diocese said records of that era were transferred to the state. Mostly. Probably. Unless they weren't. The state adoption registry had an actual human being named Denise, who explained kindly that I had no standing. I was not the adopted person. I was not the birth mother, who was deceased. I was a granddaughter with a tobacco tin, and tobacco tins are not legal standing. I understand, I said, in the voice I use at work when a family asks how long. Denise softened a little. She wasn't supposed to advise me, she said, but the registry ran on mutual consent, two parties both reaching in the dark. If the other party ever registered, she said, a match can be made. That's the only door, hun. I hung up and sat in the hospital parking lot doing what I do best, which is being sensible while my chest hurts. That baby girl was born in 1958. If she was going to reach into the dark, she'd likely done it years ago, when there was still a mother to find, and my grandmother had died in 2005, with sealed records between them like a locked screen door. But Grandma had spent 35 years being underestimated by everyone but me. A woman who buries a steel box under slate does not leave her only door unopened. I drove back out to Maple Hill on my next day off, because the one living witness I had was a man with a spade, and I hadn't asked him half enough questions. Walter was edging the lane by the veterans section, and when he saw my car, he shut the trimmer off, like he'd been waiting for the second half of a conversation. I asked him what else he remembered about her. Anything. Any detail. And it turned out that a quiet man watching a cemetery for 35 years is a better archive than the state of Ohio. She came the first week of June, every year, he said. Regular as a tax bill. Not on Mr. Hollis's birthday, I checked once. Always the start of June. She would stand at the family row a long while, he said, and she always brought two flowers. One went on Harold's side of the double stone. The other one was a white rose, and she never put it on a grave at all. She laid it on the open grass past her own headstone, on the empty ground, the way you'd set a cup of coffee at a place where nobody was sitting yet. I mowed around that rose more Junus than I can count, Walter said. You don't ask a woman about a thing like that. You just lift the rose, mow, and set it back. The first week of June, the bracelet in my kitchen said 6/3/58. My grandmother had been keeping a birthday out here in the open air, in front of everybody, for decades, and not one of us ever saw it, because nobody was looking at her anymore. I thanked Walter and stood a while at the row after he'd gone back to the trimmer. Two graves, a double headstone, and two rectangles of empty lawn, mowed as carefully as any grave in the place. It occurred to me, standing there, that I still didn't know why a widow with two living children had needed a row of four. I decided to try my mother, carefully, the way you test the ice before you put your weight on it. I brought over the extra lemon cake, which in our family is a flag of truce, and while she made coffee I said, as lightly as I could manage, "Weird question. Did Grandma ever mention a place called St. Agnes?" My mother did not turn around. I want to be precise about this, because I have replayed it 100 times. She did not say, "What's that?" or spell it. Or is that a church? Her shoulders went still over the percolator, half a second, the way a picture buffers. Then she said, "Where did you hear that name?" I said something soft about going through some of Grandma's old things, which was even true. My mom set my coffee down in front of me and looked at me with her bank face, the one that used to deny loans gently. Your grandmother had secrets she chose, she said. Leave them buried. Not, I don't know that name. Not, what secrets? Her answer skipped every question a person who didn't know would ask and went straight to the verdict. We drank our coffee and talked about the roof on Dale's place, and I drove the 12 minutes home with my hands very calm on the wheel and my mind going like a shop fan. My mother knew something. Maybe not everything, I told myself. Maybe just a rumor from her own childhood, a name overheard through a kitchen door in 1970. That's what I told myself, because the alternative had teeth. But I kept hearing the way she'd said buried, flat, final, a word she'd already decided about long before I ever walked in carrying cake. Uncle Dale is the softest touch in our family, which is probably why he married someone with a spreadsheet where her patients should be. When Grandma's house was emptied in 2005, my mom ran the operation like a foreclosure, and I was 20 and grabbed what I could. Which is why every box of Rose Hollis's photo albums and canning jars has lived in my garage for 2 decades. But Dale, it turned out, had kept something too. There's a cedar box of Mom's out in the barn loft, he said when I called. Peg's been after me for years to pitch it. Come get it before she does. His barn smelled like sawdust and WD-40, and the box came down covered in a fur of dust. Inside was the ordinary sediment of a woman's life, a rosary, a christening gown gone ivory, and a dress book with half the names crossed out as the funerals went by. And near the bottom, folded in thirds, a receipt. State of Ohio, Adoption Reunion Registry, a registration fee, paid by money order. The registrant's name was Rose M. Hollis, and the date was March of 2002. My grandmother, at 63, 3 years before she died, had walked into some government office and put her name in the dark, exactly the way Denise described. One hand reaching, waiting for another hand. I sat down on a hay bale and held that receipt for a long time, because here's what it meant. Grandma's side of the door had been open since 2002. If her daughter had ever registered too, ever, the match would have been made automatically. Either the daughter never reached, which was its own kind of sad, or she had reached, and someone, had gotten in the way. Dale stuck his head up the loft stairs. Find anything good? He asked. I don't know yet, I said, which has become the most honest sentence I own. Walter called me 2 days later, which surprised me, since I didn't remember giving him my number, and then he explained that Rose had written it in the envelope from the office safe. Of course she had. It was my childhood landline, and he'd tracked me from there, patient as grass. There's a thing you ought to see before your family signs anything, he said. In the maintenance shed, on a workbench between a chainsaw and a coffee can of bolts, he unrolled the cemetery's plat map, cracked at the folds. Older than me, he put one square finger on the Hollis row. 4 plots, drawn in fading ink. Plot 1, Harold. Plot 2, Rose. Plot 3, empty. Plot 4, empty. The office always figured the extras were for your mom and your uncle, Walter said. But she told me different. The summer she paid me. Standing right at that row. He looked at me the way people look when they're about to hand you something heavy. She said the 4th one was for the daughter who'd come home. Those were her words. I've been mowing an empty bed for 35 years. The daughter who'd come home. Not if. Who'd. My grandmother bought a grave for a woman she hadn't seen since 1958, kept it trimmed like a made bed, laid a white rose on it every June 3rd, and died still leaving the porch light on. And in 6 weeks, my mother was going to sell that bed to strangers by August 1st, and no one signing the papers would ever know it had been anything but extra lawn. I put my hand flat on the map, over the little empty rectangle, the way you'd steady a picture frame in a wind. Walter, I said, I need to find her before the 30th. He rolled up the map. Then you'd best hurry, he said. The office already penciled the dig. I had written the registry a letter after Denise's call, on the theory that paper sometimes succeeds where phones fail, asking one narrow question I was allowed to ask. Was my grandmother's 2002 registration still active in her file? The reply came that Friday in a government envelope, and I stood at my mailbox and read it twice because the words would not sit still. The registration of Rose M. Hollis, deceased 2005, remained on file. And then, in the flat mercy of form language, one more line. A prospective match inquiry had been received in September 2005 and administratively closed. Notation: contact declined by family. I stood on my own porch while the mail truck grumbled off down the street, and I felt the temperature of the afternoon change. September 2005. My grandmother died in March of 2005. She'd missed the knock on her door by 6 months. 6 months. After 47 years of leaving lights on. Somebody out there had finally reached into the dark, the very year the dark had emptied out. And then the second part, the part with teeth. Contact declined by family. Declined by whom? Not by Rose, who was under the elm at Maple Hill. Somebody living had been asked, or notified, or reached. Somebody had received that knock, stood behind the screen door of my grandmother's whole life, and said, "No thank you." And the only person the registry, or a lawyer, or anyone tying up Rose Hollis's affairs in September of 2005 would have contacted. The executor, the eldest child. The name on all the paperwork was having brunch across town right now and telling everyone that the dead don't need anything. I did not drive to my mother's house. I want credit for that. I drove to work, and I did my job. And I thought. You'd think a discovery like that entitles you to a pause, a week to think. Life doesn't schedule around your revelations. Tuesday, the cemetery office called my mother to say the buyback paperwork had cleared review, and my mother called everyone but me, and the family chat lit up with logistics. The disinterment was penciled for the morning of July 30th, pending signatures, 2 days before the offer expired. Peg posted a picture of a roofing estimate the way you'd post an X-ray, proof of necessity. My cousin gave it a thumbs up. Grandma and Grandpa had been reduced to a scheduling item between a roofer and a deadline. I called Dale because Dale was the second signature, and without him there was no dig and no deal. I could hear Peg's television in the background, and I could hear him wanting to be anywhere else. "It's a lot of money, Viv," he said, tired. "And your mom says they'll be together in the wall. Same as now. She says it's what's practical." He didn't say it's what's right. Dale never says more than he can stand behind. I asked him to give me 2 weeks before he signed anything. Just 2. And I heard him breathe, and I heard the television. And he said, "Why? What's 2 weeks going to change?" I almost told him right there. A bracelet, a rose, a bed kept empty for 35 years. But a thing this size, you only get to say once, and saying it to a tired man over Peg's television was how it would get smothered. "Family business," I said. The old kind. Saturday I passed him in the hardware store and he studied the paint chips like scripture rather than meet my eye. That's how I knew Peg had already borrowed against the money in her head, and my 2 weeks were a coin flip. My mother, meanwhile, was downsizing. She'd sold her condo plan to herself the same month the buyback letter came. Everything squared, everything converging on cash and clean surfaces, and she recruited me for a Saturday of packing her den because free labor is what daughters are for. I went, partly out of habit, partly because a woman who wants to know things says yes to rooms full of paper. Her den was rows of ring binders, church bulletins, 40 years of tax returns in labeled boxes. She kept the oak file drawer locked. Always had. And mid-afternoon she handed me the little brass key so I could pull her bank folders while she argued with the movers on the phone. I want to be honest about what happened next. I was not snooping. I was doing exactly the chore I'd been assigned, walking my fingers along the folder tabs, insurance, mortgage, pension, and there, filed between pension and property, was a tab in my mother's printing that said simply, "Estate, Rose." Inside were the ordinary papers of a death, and one envelope that was not ordinary. Cream-colored, hand addressed to the family of Rose Hollis, care of my mother's old house. The postmark said Traverse City, Michigan, September 2005. It was slit open, neat, with a letter opener. And clipped behind it was a carbon copy, my mother's habit from the bank, of the reply she had typed on her own letterhead paper. I read the reply first because it was shorter. My mother never spoke of you. You are mistaken in what you believe you are to this family. There is nothing for you here. Do not write again. No signature line softened it. Under the clip, the cream envelope waited with whatever a 67-year-old woman had needed to say to us 20 years ago. In the hallway, my mother's house slippers came whispering along the hardwood toward the den. I did something in the half-second before she reached the door that I had never once done in 40 years of being Carol Grant's daughter. I took what I needed without permission. The envelope and the carbon went flat into my waistband under my shirt. The folder went back between pension and property, and when my mother came in, I was holding her bank documents and complaining about the movers, and my voice didn't shake at all, which frightened me more than anything else that whole strange June. I drove home with somebody else's 20-year-old mail burning a stripe across my stomach. At my kitchen table, I read the letter from Traverse City, and I'm not going to give you every line of it, because it isn't mine, even now. I'll tell you, it was dignified. It said its writer had lost her adoptive mother the year before, had registered where such things are registered, and had learned two things on the same day: her mother's name and her mother's date of death. It said, I am not writing to ask for anything. I would like to know if she ever spoke of me. That was the question my mother answered with a typed no and a demand to never write again. There was a name at the bottom. June. June Calloway. Grandma's white roses had been for a girl she'd named in her heart after the month she lost her. That night at work, Mr. Aldis died at 2:10. His sister had finally agreed to come, and she was 10 minutes out when it ended, and I stood in the hallway while she arrived to a quiet room, and I watched 40 years of pride turn into a thing she'll carry to her own grave. I clocked out at dawn, sat in my car in the parking lot, and said it out loud to the windshield. Not one more June. The next morning, I knocked on my mother's door. I put the cream envelope and her carbon copy on her kitchen table, side by side, and I sat down without being asked, and for once in my life, I let a silence be her problem. My mother looked at the papers for a long moment. Then she did the thing I least expected. She sat down too, and she looked old. You went in my files, she said, but her heart wasn't in it. And we both knew what a locked drawer in a den means when you hand your daughter the key. Her name is June, I said. Mom, you knew. All the way back, you knew. And my mother, who has never volunteered a feeling in my hearing, folded her hands like a woman at a teller window and told me about being 9 years old, listening through a floor vent while her parents fought about a bus trip her mother had taken. About a name she was slapped once for repeating. About growing up in a house where every June her mother went somewhere behind her own eyes and stayed there for a week, and no casserole, no report card, no perfect attendance pin ever brought her all the way back. You can't compete with a ghost, Vivian, she said, level as a bubble in a spirit gauge. Ghosts never make mistakes. Ghosts never disappoint anybody. I spent my whole childhood losing to a baby nobody would even admit existed. For one breath I saw her, 9 years old, at a floor vent, and my anger had nowhere good to stand. Then she straightened, and the teller window closed. I buried her once, she said, nodding at the letter. In 2005. I'm burying her again on the 30th, and the wall plaque will say Hollis, and this family will finally be done paying for your grandmother's mistake. She slid the papers back across the table at me, even and unhurried like change. Keep them, there's nobody left to show. She was wrong about that, and I think she knew it before my car left her street, because my mother has never once lost a race to a telephone. By that evening, the family had been briefed, and the briefing was not about June Calloway. It was about me. Poor Vivian, 40 now, you know. No kids. Always was intense about Grandma, and now she's been digging things up at the cemetery. Actually digging. ask the groundskeeper, and waving around some old papers and trying to blow up a money decision the whole family already made. It was masterful, if you can stand back far enough to admire the stitching. Every true fact, arranged into a lie. The group chat did not attack me. It just cooled. The way a room cools when a door you can't see gets opened somewhere. My cousin stopped replying to me. Peg sent one text. Please don't make this harder for your uncle. He has enough on his plate, punctuation and all. I sat with Biscuit's head on my knee and let myself feel it, the specific loneliness of being reclassified, from the reliable one to the difficult one, in a single afternoon, by the same people whose birthdays I have in a spiral notebook. Has that ever happened to you? Have you ever been called dramatic for telling the truth in a family that calls silence keeping the peace? If you have, put it in the comments, and if you're still in the middle of it, hear me, from the far side. You are not the one making it harder. Meanwhile, I had a name, a 20-year-old postmark, and 2 weeks and change until the 30th. Finding a retired schoolteacher named June Calloway in Traverse City, Michigan, is not detective work. It's persistence. And a library card. The address from 2005 checked out against county records. Same house, same name on the parcel, a brick place on a street named for a tree. The phone number I dug up rang to a disconnect message, which felt right, since everyone her age with sense has shed their landline. That left showing up. 5.5 hours north, a night in a motel, and a knock on a stranger's door with a dead woman's tin in my hands. Here is where I did the second thing I'd never done in 40 years. I didn't gas up the car and go alone, the way I have gone alone to every hard thing since I was 20. I called Marin and I said the sentence out loud, badly, like a first-year student doing her first IV. I don't think I can do this one by myself. Will you come? Marin swapped 2 shifts, packed a cooler like we were fleeing a hurricane, and claimed the driving on the grounds that I would rehearse out loud for 5 hours if my hands were free, which was true. Biscuit took the back seat. Somewhere past Toledo, Marin glanced over and said, "What's the plan if she shuts the door?" I watched the soybean fields go by. In my work, nobody gets to rehearse the most important conversation of their life. You just have to arrive kind and tell the truth. Then I'll thank her, I said, and leave the tin. We got to Traverse City at dusk, and I slept better in that motel than I had all month. The house was small and square and serious about its garden, and up a white trellis by the porch climbed a rose bush, heavy with blooms, every one of them white. I stood on that walk a second with my whole chest ringing. She grew them too, neither of them ever knowing. The woman who answered the door was tall, straight-backed, with steel-gray hair cropped sensible, and my grandmother's jawline sitting on her face like a returned heirloom. 67 years old, and she looked at me the way you look at clipboard people. "Mrs. Calloway? My name is Vivian Grant," I said. "I believe you wrote a letter to my family in September of 2005, about Rose Hollis." Everything in her face closed at the name. Not with a slam, with the terrible smoothness of a drawer on good runners. "That was answered," she said. "You have the advantage of me, showing up at my home. I never got to show up anywhere. I got a typed paragraph." She stepped back to close the door and then stopped. Because pride wanted one more sentence. And I have learned to wait for that sentence. It's usually the true one. She went inside and came back with a folded page I recognized before it finished unfolding. My mother's letterhead, 20 years old, creased soft as cloth from handling, and that detail nearly took my legs, because I'd seen paper worn like that once already this summer, in a groundskeeper's wallet. 2 people, keeping opposite halves of the same wound. "My mother never spoke of you," June Calloway recited, not reading it, knowing it. "There is nothing for you here. Do not write again." She folded it back up along its soft creases. "Your family already answered me once," she said. "I'm 67 years old, Miss Grant. I don't ask twice." The door shut, gentle as a library, which was so much worse than a slam. I stood on the walk and did not knock again. Instead, I sat down on her porch step, opened the tin, and laid 3 things on the clean-swept boards where she'd see them through the sidelight glass. The photograph of a girl on the steps of St. Agnes, holding a blanket like it was the last warm thing on earth. The bracelet, beads spelling a name nobody had asked her permission to take away. And the letter marked Vivian, open, with its last page on top. Then I spoke at the door, at a normal volume, the way I speak in rooms where machines are beeping. The woman who typed that paragraph is my mother, and she never told a soul you wrote. Rose registered with the state in 2002, and she went in the ground in March of 2005, still waiting. You missed her by 6 months, and that is the cruelest thing I know, but she did not miss you. She kept your birthday every June 3rd for the rest of her life. Silence from the house. I'm a hospice nurse, I said. I sit with people at the end, and I'll tell you what they regret. It's never the thing they said. It's the thing they ran out of time to say. She didn't run out of time. She buried hers where time couldn't get it, and it's on your porch right now. The door opened. June Calloway stood there with her spine still perfect and her face ruined, and she looked down at the photograph a long time. I have been somebody's secret for 67 years, she said, finally, each word placed like a stitch. I will not stand at that grave as one. If I come, girl, I come in daylight. Your whole family, told to their faces or not at all. I said, then you'd better come on the 30th of July. And I told her why, and watched a woman learn the word disinterment while holding her own baby bracelet. We drove home the next day, and I went straight to Dale's. No phone call, because tired men can decline a phone call and it's harder to decline a niece on the porch steps with a steel box. Peg's television was going. I asked Dale to come out, just him. And on the porch rail, in the long yellow evening, I opened the tin and told my uncle everything. The dig, the bracelet, the registry, the letter from Traverse City, and the carbon copy with his sister's letterhead on it. Dale is a man who fixed traffic lights for 30 years, and he held that little bracelet in 2 fingers like a live wire, and when he got to the beads, he read them out loud. Baby girl Merrick, and his chin went. I have a sister, he said, not a question, checking the wiring of it. Had her my whole life. He looked at the screen door where Peg's shows murmured and then somewhere over the yard. Mom used to get quiet in June, he said. I thought it was about Dad. Everybody had a theory about her quiet and nobody ever asked her a question. That is the whole biography of women like my grandmother. I stood up and told him what I'd already decided on the highway somewhere south of Toledo. On the 30th, I would be at Maple Hill, and so would June Calloway, in daylight, in front of everyone. And the family was going to hear the truth once, out loud, whatever they chose to sign afterward. Then I drove to my mother's, stood on the stoop I learned to ride a bike off of, and told her the same, plainly, no heat in it. She heard me all the way through, I'll grant her that. Then you'll do it over my voice, not my silence, is what I actually said to her. And my mother looked at me and said, if that woman is there on the 30th, you and I are done. Choose. The night of the 29th, nobody with my last name was sleeping much. Marin had driven up to collect June that morning, 5.5 hours each way, and settled her at the motel out by the interstate, and reported that June had packed one good navy dress and pruning shears, in case, she said, anyone had let the roses go. Out at Maple Hill, Walter stayed late. He told me afterward he edged the whole Hollis row by shoplight, and then cut the empty 4th plot one more time, low and clean, and I asked him why, since by morning it might belong to a buyback file. Company was coming, he said, as if that settled it, and I suppose it did. At my kitchen table I read Grandma's letter one more time, down to the line I could now recite with my eyes shut. I was 40 the year I stopped looking. Don't you stop. I thought about my mother's kitchen, the papers sliding back across the table like change. I thought about a door in Traverse City closing gentle as a library. Biscuits sighed on my feet. I washed the cake plate, laid out clothes a person could stand steady in, and set 2 alarms I did not need. The forecast said clear and hot. It kept its word. The 30th of July came up bright and loud with cicadas. The cemetery office had scheduled the family for 8, sign-offs first, dig after, everything decent and in order, and when I pulled through the iron gate at a quarter till, the machinery was already staged. A compact excavator sat on rubber tracks by the elm, engine idling, a polite blue tarp folded on the grass like a napkin. 8 weeks ago, a man had opened this same ground with a spade and his 2 hands, slow as a prayer, and now a machine stood yawning over the row. And if you want to know the difference between remembering somebody and processing them, it was all right there under that tree, idling. The director came out with a clipboard and the careful voice of a man whose whole job is other people's worst mornings. Papers were in order, he said. The buyback needed both children of record, notarized, before the permit application went in. One signature was already done. My mother had signed on the 28th, first in line, the way she has been first in line for every unpleasant necessary thing her whole life, and I will not pretend there is no cost to being that woman. But this morning I could not afford the sympathy. Carol Grant stood at the head of the row in a pressed gray blouse, straight as a ruler against the crooked old headstones, not looking at the machine, not looking at the graves, looking at the gate. Dale's truck rolled in at 5 till, Peg riding shotgun with the roofing estimate practically visible through her purse. And then, right behind them, unhurried, a sedan none of them knew came through the gate with Marin at the wheel, and my mother's chin came up like a drawbridge. June Calloway got out of that car the way you'd enter a church you'd been barred from, slow, upright, gloved, the navy dress. My grandmother's jaw. She did not look at the excavator or the clipboard or the tarp. She looked at the double headstone and she took one long breath, the kind we coach families through, and then she looked at the people. Dale went white, and I watched him understand with no one explaining a single thing to him, because 60 years of a face is its own paperwork. Peg's hand went up to her mouth. The director glanced between the parties, sensing, the way professionals do, that his morning had left the rails. And my mother turned to me, only to me, as if the row and the machine and the woman in navy were details that could be managed after, and she spoke in the voice I have heard her use on delinquent accounts, level, almost kind, loud enough to be a matter of record. You still have a choice, Vivian. Send her away, or you and I are done. I mean it to the end of my life. The cicadas sawed. The excavator idled. Somewhere down the hill Walter turned off a sprinkler, and the quiet where its ticking had been was the loudest thing in the county. I looked at my mother, 9 years old once at a floor vent, losing every June to a ghost, and I looked at June, 67 years old, holding her gloves like a hymnal, on her first and maybe only visit to her mother's ground. Everybody I had ever tried to keep peaceful was standing in one row of grass, and the one woman who had trusted me to do this was 3 feet under it. So I did what she'd paid a man in 1990 to make possible. I chose. I didn't raise my voice. I've learned deathbed quiet carries farther than shouting ever has. Mom, I said, I love you, and I'm done choosing silence and calling it love. Then I turned so the whole row could hear me, and I did the thing June had asked for and the thing Grandma had waited 35 years in the ground for. I made the introductions, in daylight, by name. Dale, Peg, Mom. This is June Calloway of Traverse City, Michigan, born June 3, 1958, at the St. Agnes home, to Rose Merrick, 20 years old and unmarried and given no say. Your sister, I said to Dale. And yours? I said to my mother. And my aunt. Nobody moved, so I kept my voice steady the way you do while the machines beep, and I took out the letter that had spent 35 years under slate, and I read it to them. All of it. The step at St. Agnes, the papers signed in a room full of waiting relatives, the bus trip she never explained, the sealed records, the roses. When I reached her line, I read it slower, because it was the reason all of us were standing there. I was 40 the year I stopped looking. Don't you stop. Then I folded the letter and I put the little bracelet in Dale's open palm, beads up, and my uncle closed his fist around his sister's name and wept the way utility men weep. Silently, furiously, like it's a leak he can't locate. My mother's face had gone the gray of the headstones. You're doing this to punish me, she said, and her voice, her level bank voice, cracked clean through the middle. And there it was at last, underneath 40 years of ledgers, a 9-year-old at a floor vent, still waiting to be somebody's favorite. "No, Mom," I said, quiet. "You told me once the dead don't need anything. You were right. She doesn't need the plot, or the headstone, or the roses. This was never for her. The living need the truth. And we have needed it since 1958. And you have needed it worse than any of us." I turned to the director, whose clipboard hung forgotten against his leg. "Sir, I believe you're still short a signature." And every head under that elm turned to my Uncle Dale. Dale looked at the bracelet in his fist, and at the woman in navy who had his mother's jaw and his own deep-set eyes, and then at Peg. And I will always honor what Peg did in that moment, which was nothing. She looked at the roofing money going away, and she put her hand on her husband's arm, and she let it go. "I'm not signing," Dale said. His voice wobbled and held. "Not today. Not ever. Mom bought 4 beds under this tree, and I finally know why. And I'll fix every roof in this county with my own 2 hands before I sell one of them." The director, to his credit, did not sigh over his lost morning. He clicked his pen closed, said the application could not proceed without both parties, said the buyback offer would lapse on the 1st, and signaled the operator, and the excavator's engine coughed once and shut down. And the silence that came in behind it was the cleanest sound I have ever heard. My mother gathered her purse from the headstone where it had rested. She did not look at June. She walked back down the row the way she came, past the machine, past the director, and she paused when she drew even with me, half a step, her eyes straight ahead. I stood still and let her have this last word, because I'd already had the ones that counted. "You are your grandmother," she said, like a diagnosis. Then she got in her sedan, and the door closed behind her with a soft, expensive click, and my mother kept her promise to the end of it. What was left under the elm was smaller and better. June Calloway walked the row alone while the crew loaded the machine onto its trailer. She stood a while at the double headstone, reading her mother's dates the way you'd read a letter that arrived late through no fault of the mail. Then she stepped past it, onto the trimmed rectangle of empty lawn at the end of the row, plot 4, and she stood on that grass in her good navy dress, and looked down at it, and understood it without being told, because she had spent her whole life being nobody's, and she knew a kept place when she was standing on one. "She kept a bed for me," June said. "Not to me, exactly. To the tree, to the row, to the morning." Walter had come up quiet with his cap in his hands, and he answered her the way he'd answered a widow in 1990, plain and sworn. "35 years, ma'am," he said. "The grass never once grew wrong." June Calloway, 67 years old, born at St. Agnes and mailed into the dark, put her gloves to her mouth and cried in daylight, in front of witnesses, on ground with her family's name on it. And I fell to my knees for the 2nd time that summer, catching her hand. It's early September now, and here is where everything landed. The buyback offer expired on the 1st of August, unsigned. The Hollis row stays whole under the elm. 4 beds, 2 filled, 2 waiting, and if you think a cemetery can't feel different after a morning like that, spend 20 years visiting one alone, and then stop being alone there. June comes down once a month. 5.5 hours each way, and she calls it nothing. A schoolteacher's contempt for distance. She brings white roses off her own trellis and lays one on Rose's grave and, some visits, one on the empty 4th plot, which I once thought was the saddest patch of grass in Ohio, and now think might be the most loved. She and Dale talk on the phone on Sunday nights. He drove up in October, is the plan, to see her garden and fix her porch light, because Dale still can't say love out loud, so he installs it. Peg mails her recipes. The roof got done too, by the way, on a payment plan, the regular way people do hard things. My mother and I have not spoken since the soft click of that car door. Some of the family calls it a tragedy and misses her at things, and I've heard secondhand that at brunch I am the one who chose a stranger over my own mother, and the strangest part is that it doesn't burn the way it used to, because I finally know the difference between keeping the peace and keeping the silence. One thing, though. Last week, a card came to my house with no return address and no signature, my mother's bank teller handwriting on the envelope, addressed not to me, to Mrs. June Calloway, care of Vivian Grant. I didn't open it. I drove it to the post office and sent it north, and I don't know what's in it. And it is not mine to know. It's a crack in a wall, that's all. Some walls only ever get cracks. You learn to bless the crack. As for me, I photocopied Grandma's lemon cake recipe, the pencil one from the cabinet door, and there are copies now in 3 kitchens. Mine, June's, and Dale's. Which means no one ever has to be the only one who keeps it again. Walter got the last unturned thing. When the office paperwork settled, I asked him to do one more job at the family's expense, and in late August he set a small granite footstone flush in the grass at Plot 4. It doesn't say a name. That's June's to decide. Someday. A long time from now. It says just what Rose would have wanted the ground to admit out loud. Kept. Somebody in every family ends up being the one who remembers. And what my grandmother taught me, from 3 feet down in the June grass, is that remembering was never meant to be a thing you do alone, or in silence, or only for the dead. That's my story. 1 blue tin, a promise kept for 35 years, and a 4th bed of grass that finally has a name coming to it. If somebody in your family is carrying a secret alone, maybe today is the day it gets said in daylight. Share this video with the one who remembers, drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.